forget to check the email associated with this account, and won't even notice for weeks and months that someone has contacted me. I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean to do that. The email that's associated with this account is not one of my primary accounts. I do spend a lot of my time working, and personal emails get lost in the on the wayside as a result. I'm very sorry. So I was noticing that I had a couple of messages, and I was handling that last night, which meant coming to one of my older videos when I was thinner and less wrinkly, and responding to a 3-month-old message, embarrassedly, yeah. And I ended up watching this mostly because I was so young, and being reminded of this event in which I was discussing an implant, and my waking time where I was picked up by my handlers and actually was awake for it. I noticed through the course of the video that there was a story I hadn't shared. I know why I had not shared it. It was because it was still pretty close, and I was still at Fort Polk at the time, and sometimes I withhold information because I don't know if it's okay to share it. I don't know what's going to happen if I do share it, and I think that the circumstances around it are something that other MILABs can relate to. Have any of you noticed that, let's say you're moving from, I don't know, let's say you're moving from Milwaukee and moving to Podunk, Virginia, someplace in Virginia, that if you have good memory recall of your nighttime excursions, you're going to remember a transfer process. Marrying my husband, who was, you know, an active duty serviceman at the time, I learned that this was actually the military way of handling being transferred from one place to another. After I learned that these vague things that happened to me, which I always thought it was some bureaucratic process with fishbowl, when I learned that this was paralleled in Army life, I started getting better details out of it. So, we're transferring from Fort Campbell to Fort Polk, and the normal paperwork process was going through, and I only vaguely remember it now. I remembered it then, and now it's like, you know how it goes. It becomes like a vague dream. And we get to Fort Polk, and it took them a while to get us, you know, in housing and everything. And whenever we were finally settled and we finally had our housing, I had, well, my first time of going to work and coming back and remembering it was a lot of me being really disappointed at what I had been transferred to do. Apparently, I was used to getting to do things like handle equipment and build things and do things, and they had sent me to this unit that was basically like putting old Bessie out to a pasture to retire. And I was really upset by this, that I was no longer going to get to be active. They had me doing things like testing sonic toothbrushes. And I was like, what the heck? You've got me testing this? I built these. I actually complained to this guy. He was kind of like a handler. He was really stocky built, and he had like short cropped blonde hair. That's really all I remember out of him, was how, mostly I remember how stocky he was and how Caucasian he was. He was really Caucasian, like really pale person, like Norwegian pale. And so I'm upset about this, and it was that feeling of upset, because if you get me upset on the job, 9 times out of 10 I'm going to remember the job. And he said to me, welcome to Unit 52, but I can't remember the conversation now, and I had all of this up at blordy.com, and blordy.com is now gone. And so there went my dream diary. So what I get for trusting the cloud. Don't trust the cloud. So that was my first waking experience, but the important one happened later. There was a blonde female doctor, And of course, I'm going to remember her always wearing that white trench coat. I'm not the only one that remembers that. I've actually met others that remember them in white trench coats. And she always had a clipboard. There was this one mission where we were one group of people versus the other group of people, and we were faking out a last stand fight with guns. I was the leader of my side, and I actually stood behind as the women that were on my side were firing at the men, because it was a man versus woman scenario for some stupid reason. And I remember what threw me out of that scenario was they were aiming their rifles at us and firing, and it was supposed to be rapid fire, and I knew it was supposed to be rapid fire, and everyone around me is jerking around like they're getting shot and dying, but there were no shot sounds because the guns were not really firing. We had been put under to believe we were shooting each other. And there was this one girl who, as far as I knew, was not that high up on our unit ladder, and she threw herself out in front of me to protect me. And even though I was consciously aware that I was acting out a scenario, I was also caught in the hypnotic dream. So I fall to this person at my feet, and there's no blood, but my mind is telling me that there's a pool of blood oozing everywhere, and the guys are all laying down dead because they had been killed in my defense. And I told her, I held her, and I said to her, "Don't you die on me now." And she expired in my arms. Well, I got up, and the doctor is there, and she and two others immediately rushed to my side, and they're taking notes and they're observing me. And I start to walk off, which I like to do when I'm disturbed. I like to walk off and be alone for a minute. You know, this whole women Venus cave thing, though, I like to cave. I obviously am not male, whatever. And so I walked off, and they're following me, and they're like, "Well, what's wrong?" And I looked at them and I said, "I just want to be alone, okay?" But there was this one incident that I cannot remember much now, but we were gearing up to actually go to the trip. Like, you know how you load up and you go to the meeting place and you congregate, and then, you know, you go. And I was there, and she was there. And usually whenever I'm going, I'm hardly ever sent with the crowd. I'm always set aside. And so I'm there, and she's there, and she said to me, "Do you want to remember?" This is one of the first things that happened to me at Fort Polk, and this set the precedence for the rest of the time I was at Fort Polk. I said to her, because I'm an idiot, "Only if you don't hurt me." Because I'm an idiot. I should have just said yes. And then that was the end of that. And the next day I was very disappointed that I didn't remember. I was very disappointed because it meant they'd hurt me somehow. I said that when I should have said yes, because it's going to hurt whether or not I remember later or not. So what's the difference? On one of the missions, we were out, and there were these children with us, and they were doing things. And sometimes when you're on the missions, and in time, you know, let me know if I'm off on this, because this has happened to me on more than one occasion. But you'll be doing a mission, and you'll see somebody else interacting like a field over, because everything's contained, and they're doing a different mission in their little dream scenario, and you're in the same area, but you're not interacting, and so therefore you're not in each other's missions. Well, that was happening. There were these children, but having been a parent, you know, parental instincts kicked in, and that interfered, and I'm watching these kids, and I remember where we were at. We had driven through a lot of back roads, and this was before I really knew about the training area at Fort Polk. I had not been out there yet. And I'm probably going to repeat myself in some parts of the story I have already told. If you're new, it's going to be new to you. If not, I am sorry for being such a bore. But in this particular scenario, we're out in the back roads, and we had crossed a railroad track, and over the railroad track there was a little cemetery, and there was also a one of those planes that the military have for display, and it was on the black stand, and it was like a little helicopter. And I remember knowing that that helicopter was at some point, if not for myself, at some point being used and and you were told that you were jumping out of a real helicopter in the dream, which they do in training, by the way, on these fake helicopters. But this helicopter was different. It was elevated up, and it was different from the other ones at Fort Polk, and it was black. And I remember wanting to, touching it and reading the stickers, which now I can't remember what the stickers said, because the kids just ran off and went behind like this fenced area that I knew was off limits, and I went to follow them and I couldn't. I stopped. I could not bring myself to break that rule, and that's where the upset to remember that night comes in. But the reason why this event is so important is because afterwards I learned that out in the training areas of Fort Polk, there is a region that is that, and there are quite a few cemeteries out there actually that you're not allowed to get to because they're in, you know, testing areas or whatever now, from where the land had been seized from farmers. And another thing is that the reason why it's so important, and I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, is my very first time actually driving back there, the husband's taking me out to see Little Baghdad, which is this little teeny weeny fake city area, and he only knew the long way. And as we're driving in, I don't know how I knew it, but I knew the shortcut. And I was like, let's take this way. I feel this is the right way. And where it would have taken him an hour and something to get to Little Baghdad, it took me 15, 20 minutes because I knew the way. This is important for MILABs, period, I think, to know these things. You hear a lot of MILABs are talking about how there was this mission and it was so real. But I guess because I've lost so much of my ability to get lost in the dream, I'm noticing that some of these missions aren't real. They're testing. They were testing to see how I reacted to somebody dying to save my life. They were testing the men versus women shooting each other to death with rifles, and we were shooting. We were standing face to face like the British used to fight back in the Civil War, not the Civil War, during the Revolutionary days, you know, Victorian times, not Victorian, but back then, way back, there was no reality to these bullets. And to this day, as far as I know, everyone else in the scenario believes this really happened, that they really shot someone, and that perhaps they were in a cloned body or whatever. These are important things to know, that sometimes not so much, because for whatever stupid reason, the same experiments that were happening in the 50s and 60s of hypnotizing people to believe they shot someone to death, they're still doing that, even though they freaking already know the answers. I don't know why. I'm pretty sure you don't know why. I think it's a waste of taxpayers' money. I know you think it's a waste of taxpayers' money, but there is this thing. The thing is, when you realize you're left wondering, is that time that I repaired the space station, was it real? Without a professional hypnotist, I may never know. But I thought I would share that with you because I was reminded of it tonight. And this has went along way too long. So I'm going to shut up now. I'm shutting up. Shutting up.